data scientist.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So, let's see. Yes. Okay. So why did we run a survey? Why another survey? There are already reports out there. Well, we know that 93% of young people say they want to volunteer, but many fewer actually do. And we did turn to other research first to see what motivates young people to volunteer and how can we close the gap between those who say they want to volunteer and those that do. But what we found is that there's a gap in the research. There's not a robust study on why young people volunteer. And so what we did is we rolled out one of the most comprehensive looks at why young people volunteer to date. And this was particularly unique in 3 ways. So first of all, this is to the best of our knowledge, this is the first major survey on young people and volunteering that incorporates those ages 13 to 15 as respondents, which is a critical part of our demographic. Second, the second major part was focused on, if somebody can hit the next slide for me. There we go. Whoop. Yes, that's a sneak preview of where we're going. Yes, so it always ends up with Katniss. But to start, another major difference is how we define volunteering, because young people volunteer in a diversity of ways. And the way traditional volunteer studies define it is only volunteering done with organizations. So things like the Boy Scouts or 4-H. That's how the federal government defines volunteering. But if you talk to young people, they often don't volunteer with organizations. They don't even use the word organization. So looking at Google Trends, you'll see since 2004, the use of the word organization itself has fallen to less than half of its former frequency. And instead, club and group, those are used 10 and 16 times as often, respectively. So with our more comprehensive definition of volunteering, we saw rates move from 22%, like the federal government reports, to 54%. Over half of young people are volunteering. And the third major way that this report is different is dispelling some myths around why young people volunteer. So if you ask a young person why they volunteer, you'll get answers like, because I want to make a difference in the lives of people, or I want to make a difference on an issue that I care about. What you don't hear is things like, I want to become eligible to earn a scholarship, or I want to meet cute girls, or some of these less altruistic reasons. But what we did is we asked questions, instead of asking, why do you volunteer, we asked questions in a different way. Like, why do you think other young people your age volunteer? And we ask it that way, some of these less altruistic motivations come to the surface. So a major example of this, a major finding, is that the #1 reason young people volunteer is because their friends are volunteering. So this may not seem surprising, but if you look at prior research, the impact of friends on volunteering was ranked as the 5th most important factor or lower. And so here what we're showing is actually has a much more substantial impact than we thought before. And so we see that of those whose friends volunteer, 76% of those young people are volunteering too. And if your friends don't volunteer, then we're talking more like 42%. So another major finding is that besides young people volunteering in social ways, they're also volunteering in unconventional ways. I talked about the word organization. Young people sometimes don't use it. We found that 40% of young people who volunteered did not do any volunteering work with an organization at all. So they're volunteering with friends, with family, with informal groups of students. And with these two findings together, this gives us a new lens on how to design volunteer activities. Think of it more like a party. So, and thinking about what kind of party you want to throw, it's not a Sweet 16 party. It's not this fancy, big to-do where people have to dress up. It's more informal. It's more like hanging out with your friends in the basement, watching a game of football. People can come and go as they please. They don't have to prepare. And this is particularly important when framed around what activity is most important in young people's lives. It's not volunteering when you ask them. The number one activity that matters most to young people is hanging out with their friends. And so if we shape volunteering more like hanging out with your friends and social change layered on top of that, that's how we're going to create volunteer activities that work for young people. Okay, and now Muneer is going to give a case study of how we've applied some of these learnings to the types of volunteer activities we're running at DoSomething.
Great, thanks, Bob. And as I'm talking, we're going to switch the screens, because as you saw, the Hunger Games picture, it didn't make sense because it was actually a GIF. It was supposed to be moving around. So you'll see more GIFs later on. So the Hunt is actually a campaign that we launched last year. It was one of our first campaigns that actually required young people to work together, because we know that young people work together if they're volunteer more if they're working with friends. So this year when we launched it, we made sure that the campaign, it's called the Hunt. To give you a brief overview of the campaign, it's basically encouraging young people to create teams online or via SMS. And when the campaign starts, for 11 consecutive days, we send them text messages every morning at 11:11 that gives them a mission. And the mission is one specific call to action that is based on a specific cause. So for example, the first day is on recycling. So we asked them to collect 50 cans in their community. And they could do it wherever they want, however they want, with whoever they want. So it gives them that flexibility to do that action without us forcing them to do it in a specific way. The second day was about bullying. The third day was about the environment. Fourth was about saving vampire energy, stuff like that. So for 11 days, there were consecutive missions that young people could do very easily in the community. Second thing is it's SMS. This is a tool that we realized a few years ago that young people are using a lot, and Bob's going to talk about that in just a little bit. But what's really cool about SMS is that young people are texting a lot, right? So we use that tool to communicate with them. So they could not only sign up for the campaign via SMS, but they could also report back to us that they completed the campaign. They completed the mission. So at the end of the day, depending on how many missions that they did and how many people were involved in that mission, they got points. And the prize was each of them got a Lenovo laptop from one of our wonderful sponsors. And second was a free trip to the DoSomething Awards in LA, which 11 young people came to this year. It was really awesome. And one thing that's really cool that this campaign encourages is flexibility. So like I talked about earlier, every single one of the missions allowed young people to do it however they want to do it, whenever they want to do it, kind of like Bob talked about. It didn't require a commitment. The only commitment they had to make was choosing the mission that they want to do. If they did all 11 missions, then they had the opportunity to win those prizes, more so than if they didn't. So 11 days, 11 causes, and the more points you had, you got the prizes. So.
Cool. So now we're going to go into the specific findings that tie back to those two major themes of young people volunteering in social ways and unconventional ways. So who goes out and volunteers? One of the cool findings was that it's people who are going to the movies and to the mall, more than people who don't go to the movies or the mall. And so parents might think, oh, I don't want my kids spending all this time at the movies or going to hanging out at the mall all day. But we found that the people going to the mall are actually volunteering more than those who don't. And we looked into, well, is this just about wealth? People from families with higher wealth tend to volunteer more. They tend to go to the mall more. But it's not about that. We looked into that. That's not the factor. It holds regardless of family wealth. What is the factor, we think, though, is the social network. So young people who are going to the movies, going to the mall, probably tend to have stronger social networks. But going to the movies and the mall also reinforces these networks, makes them stronger. You're hanging out with your friends. You're more likely to not only go to the mall, but also to go out and volunteer with your friends as well. And then here's another case study on how that ties into another campaign we ran.
So this campaign is about homelessness. We know that a third of the homeless population in the country is under the age of 18. So when we imagine homelessness, we think of like those old people with trash bags or shopping carts on the subway or on the street, right? But a third of the population is actually under the age of 18. So we wanted to address that. So we created a campaign called Teens for Jeans, which was basically collecting a pair of jeans. And why a pair of jeans? Because that's the first thing, that's the one thing that young people ask for when they get to a homeless shelter. It's totally crazy, right? You'd think that they probably want like a cell phone or maybe some food, but it's actually a pair of jeans. And when you think about it, it makes sense. How many of us wear the same pair of jeans like maybe at least twice a week? Or maybe all days of the week? Or I mean, I was in high school, I wore the same pair of jeans at least 3 times a week because they were just my favorite pair of jeans. I just knew that I looked hot in it, right? But so it was a campaign that was really easy. The call to action was to grab a pair of jeans that you don't wear anymore and drop it off at your local Aeropostale store. Aeropostale was one of our awesome sponsors that supported that. So it was local. It wasn't at home, but it was accessible. It was at the mall, which means there are young people already at the mall. They're spending a lot of time there, so we made it really easy for them that way. And second, it's an issue that they already care about. Homelessness is one of the top issues that young people talk about all the time that they want to address. And number 3 was that it's something that's helping their peers. So they're helping each other. So they can see the impact of oh, I'm 17 or I'm 15, and if I don't have a pair of jeans, how does that make me feel? They can relate to that issue. So we included this campaign, and happy to report that this year we collected over 1 million pairs of jeans, and that's effectively clothing 2/3 of the homeless population in the country. So it's really awesome that we were able to do that, and we're hoping that next year we'll beat that number. But I don't know, we'll just beat it. We'll crush it. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the most exciting things I think that this survey gives us more supporting evidence about is how powerful texting is for young people and taking action. So we found that young people who text regularly are 13% more likely to volunteer than young people who have cell phones but don't text regularly. This ties in with everything else we know about why texting is awesome. So the latest data from Pew Research is that the average teen now exchanges over 5,000 texts per month. We also know that if you Google email is for, type in Google email is for, the first autocomplete is old people. And so instead of sending out a newsletter or an email, think about sending out a text instead. And when we've done this, when we text with our users, we found that they're 30 times more likely to take action than when we contact those same members by email.
This is one of my favorite case studies, pregnancy text. How many of you got an egg to take care of in high school as a way to learn how to be a parent? Okay, a bunch of you. For those of you who don't know, a lot of times home economics class, I took that class. I don't know why, but I took it. I was given an egg as a way to represent how good of a parent I would be. I don't know how good I was because I killed a baby within a day. But we took that same idea and transferred it into the 21st century and into a phone. So this campaign was about getting young people to impregnate their friends' phones. Okay, so this was our first campaign that was entirely mobile-based. So it was entirely SMS-based. People could sign up online, sign up on their cell phone, and they would go through the experience all day long. So they would work as, they could text baby to 38383, and they would get a message saying, give us 5 of your friends' phone numbers, and we will impregnate their phones. And as soon as they do that, their friends would get a message saying, hey, you've just been impregnated, and they sign up to the campaign. The next day at 6 a.m., they would get a really crazy text message, like, wah, wah, the baby's awake, take care of me. 8 a.m., they'll get another message. 10 a.m., they'll get another message. 1 p.m., they'll get another message. The idea was to get people to start thinking about how hard it is to be a parent, right? And how hard it is to have a baby that you have to take care of all the time. And right now, we have 630,000 subscribers on our mobile database. 37% of them came from friends. So this became social, even though it's an individual campaign. It became social because we required them to invite their friends, and it became really, really fun that way. And third was we gamified it. We made it an experience. So it's something that they could really enjoy and have a good time with. So it wasn't just they're sharing a stat, right? They're sharing an experience with their friends, and they could go home or go to school next day and talk about it with their friends. Like, hey, did you get that baby that I sent you? Haha, I just impregnated your baby, or I just impregnated your phone, and how crazy is that? And a lot of people actually signed out of that because people felt like, wow, this is really annoying, which is kind of the point, right? Because you're talking about teen pregnancy, and you want them to realize how hard it is. And what was amazing, the success of this campaign was that we had over 130,000 people sign up within a 6-week period. Within the first week, we were getting text messages back every 10 seconds from young people. And on average, it was every 2 weeks. Every 20 seconds, we were getting text messages on average throughout the length of the campaign. So that just shows how impactful this campaign was. And then when we did the post-analysis of the campaign, we found that 1 in 2 people were able to talk about teen pregnancy with their friends and family. So that shows that we actually had impact.
Yeah, the really cool thing about talking with your friends and family about the issue of teen pregnancy, that's the #1 way that researchers have found that people actually change their behavior around teen pregnancy, just talking about the issue with their friends and family. And now I'm passing to Aria.
Thanks, Bob. So I first wanted to say that this afternoon, you guys are all going to get a PDF of this report. And in case you're sort of wondering about these stats or is this legit, there's like a whole cover page of the report where Bob talks about like multivariate analysis and how he weighted for the national average. And it's legit because we have data scientists like Bob on staff. So just sort of like be proud that we're having some very serious data coming at you today. So right now, even though I love New York, we're not going to talk about an empire state of mind. We're going to talk about a volunteer state of mind. Like, how do these guys think? What do they want? What are they doing? And so the first thing we want to talk about is what are their top 5 issues? And so some of these stay pretty much constant. So animal welfare, I mean, you talk to a 14-year-old girl about puppies, Lord almighty, you have her for life. So especially the younger part of our demographic is really obsessed with animal welfare. And I have to say, it's not just teenagers. We just launched this animal welfare campaign, and I have never, ever, I've been at DoSomething for 7 years, I have never gotten so much positive feedback from like 55-year-old women, men, my grandma, like my best friend, just talking about how cute puppies and cats are. So when in doubt, go animal welfare. Hunger, homelessness, and the environment, those are also often top causes. Young people like to focus on things that they can actually do something about, that they can actually sort of wrap their heads about. They can't imagine that someone their age would be without a home or that someone their age cannot find their next meal. And then we often see in the top 5 sort of the crisis of the day. And unfortunately, right now it is the economy. And when we talk to teens, we've seen a trend over the past few years is that financial literacy, financial education, it's like, yawn, that is so boring. Like, really, why do we have to talk about that? In the last year, I mean, again, this is not surprising, but it's been a marked shift in that teens are worried about their parents' jobs. They are getting jobs to support that. They are worried about the economy. They're worrying about paying off student loans. And so it's something that's on the top of their minds. One thing that people often ask is why isn't sort of bullying in this top 5 list? And it was certainly on young people's radars, but I also think 2 things. One is bullying has always been a problem for young people. It's sort of just old people that finally caught up to it being a problem right now. Like, we just started paying attention. And also, when young people are primed to think about volunteerism, they might not think about bullying in that same category, in that same frame. And I think that's one of the reasons we didn't see it as a top 5 cause. So this was really interesting. We looked at it by region as to what was the top cause that they cared about. And I think this is the first time in the history of the world that the Northeast and the South have ever been together on a map of the US together. But it's true, they are together, perhaps not in politics, but the Northeast and the South, animal welfare was the top cause that they cared about. For the Midwest, it was hunger, and then also for the West Coast, it was homelessness. Again, these aren't large variations, but you'll be able to see when we hand out the full survey that there were slight sort of regional differences about what young people care about. So this really, really pains me as a proud public school graduate, but the unfortunate case is we looked at the data, Bob looked at the data. So when Bob looked at the data, he saw a marked difference between public school kids and private school kids in terms of volunteering. And unfortunately, it's private school kids who actually volunteer at a much greater rate than public school kids. We can only sort of guess why. And again, this is controlling for wealth. And we saw that, of course, you can imagine pressure to get into college. Access to volunteer opportunities could obviously be a huge reason. And so I do not think the Gossip Girl cast is particularly a good representation of young people in the society. The good news is, if we look at the next slide, that family wealth matters, that of course it matters if you're higher income, your parents perhaps would encourage you to volunteer more, you have more access. But if you take a young person who's low income, who's been going to a public school, and you put them into a private school, we can surmise that actually their volunteering was increased. It actually does not hold that just public school kids are just worse kids than private school kids. It just has to do with the opportunities that are there for them. So this is a huge opportunity for DoSomething and for other people in the room who want young people to volunteer more. It's not that the public school kids don't care, it's just that they don't have the access that the private school kids might have. Why teens volunteer?
All right. So on the first slide here, next slide, this is something that we've already talked a little bit about. So the impact of your friends. But we see that actually the impact of friends increases over time as young people get older. And in college, the impact of friends on a young person's volunteering behavior is 4 times as strong as the influence of their parents. But in high school, parents have the edge. So in high school, parents actually have slightly more influence over a young person's volunteering behavior than that person's friends. And this is especially true early on, so freshman, sophomore year. So the takeaway for parents is to act early. Otherwise, you may be leaving volunteering behavior up to the young person's freshman roommate, which may or may not be a good idea. So on to guys and girls.
So again, I'm basically here to talk about all the cliched stuff in the research. So like, no shit, Aria, private school kids volunteer more than public school kids. We also asked young people why they volunteer. And girls, their top choices were, it's a cause I care about, I want to make a difference. Like, volunteering is its own reward. Like, these girls, they are earnest. Guys, their top cause was still cause I care about. And then they were like, F it. I want to get into college. I want to get a good job. Like, I am doing this for me. And so again, I think sometimes what happens is with guys and girls, it's all about revealed preferences. There are obviously some like you have to be macho, whatever it might be. I remember very clearly last summer, one of my favorite interns at DoSomething, the interns in the room notwithstanding, her name was Colleen, and her mom had breast cancer. And she emailed something out to her friends. It was like, hey, do you guys want to come volunteer on Saturday? And they were like, no, that's stupid. Like, I don't want to come. And then she wrote them a note. She was like, hey, my mom just got diagnosed with breast cancer. Do you want to come to this cancer event on Saturday? And immediately every single one of them was like, Colleen, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't realize it. I didn't know this was so important to you. Like, anything that's important to you is important to me. And so I think sometimes you just need to change the frame and figure out how you're going to be talking to girls versus how you're going to be talking to guys, because I think sometimes it has to be different because they're coming from different sort of motivational places. And so the next slide, we're having Ryan Gosling apologize on behalf of all men. He wouldn't put us in a binder. We actually just really like him.
Okay, so how teens volunteer. So the number one way that young people who volunteer, is fundraising. So fundraising is the number one activity for young people who volunteer. 38.5% of young people who volunteered last year did some fundraising. And we think that young people are actually a secret weapon for charities. That young people don't have money, but they can be really, really convincing for older people, for adults, at convincing them to donate to charities. And so instead of turning into a newsletter or an email, convince young people to pitch on your behalf, and that's where you're going to get some philanthropy from older people. Yes, the TiVo. So religious organizations, especially youth groups, that's the number one organization through which young people volunteer. And an important thing to note is that when we looked at why religious people tend to volunteer, young people tend to volunteer more, it's not how important they view religion in their lives. So if you ask them how important is religion in your life, that has no influence on whether or not they volunteer. What does is how often they attend religious services and attend youth group events. So it's not so much about the religion, we think, as about being around other young people who care about making the world a better place. And then on extracurricular activities, so what we found is that young people tend to volunteer in ways that fit in with their hobbies. So for high school athletes, they tend to volunteer with young people in sports and recreational activities. For young high school musicians, they tend to volunteer by helping out young people in music and arts programs. And so in general, if you want to know how to engage young people in volunteering, look to what they do for fun, and then turn that into a volunteering opportunity.
So it's me again to talk about why young people are heteronormative. Okay, so when young people talk about volunteering, women often talk about helping people, and young men, the number one thing they want to do to help people is a physical activity. So whether it's a 3-on-3 basketball tournament that raises funds, or they're playing soccer with young kids in the neighborhood, whatever it might be, young people, unfortunately, young men, it's a physical activity, and young women, they talk about helping people. I also want to say for the record that while we were practicing for this, Bob was like, guys, the GIFs really distract me. He's like, it's going to be horrible if the GIFs are on screen while I'm talking. Notice throughout the presentation, only Bob has GIFs. It was a gift that we gave to him.
Okay, so volunteering isn't just helpful for the world. It can also be really helpful for the volunteers themselves. So one of the really cool findings that we had here was, that volunteering makes you happier. So we found that when we asked people about life satisfaction, we used a life satisfaction questionnaire, that young people who volunteer scored 24% higher than young people who don't volunteer on this scale. And you can actually break this down by activity. The happiest volunteers are those who volunteer with young people in sports and recreation programs. The least happy volunteers are those who work on political campaigns. Something that I think we can agree is important, but it's not always the happiest thing to be working on.
So Muneer made me do this slide to talk about people who volunteer are more engaged because I just got engaged. Basically, I just wanted strangers clapping for me. No, but it was actually really interesting. We had an interesting discussion at our board meeting a few months ago, and we said to them, do we need to prove that what we do is good? We know through our various campaigns, our Give a Spit campaign, we got 15,000 new people on the bone marrow registry, and we saved 7 lives. We know that we collected genes. We know that we did all these things. Do we need to prove that we are sort of helpful to the teens themselves? Truth be told, the board was like, no, of course it's great, you're fine. And we were like, okay, we want to go a little bit further than that. And so when you look into all the data we have and all the data that's out there, you really see that young people who volunteer are more engaged. So this means they're more likely to vote, they do better in school, they're more engaged in their communities. And so this isn't just when young people volunteer, they help the people they're supposed to help. Obviously, they also help themselves. And so I think that's really key to sort of creating this positive society we want, that if all young people are volunteering, they're going to be more engaged in their society on every measure, not just volunteerism.
Okay, so one of the big takeaways from us is how do we turn these insights into action, not only for our organization, but other nonprofits that are working to help young people make a difference. So one big thing we've been talking about is make volunteering social. So if you think about an environmental organization, don't have people do data entry. Don't have people even move away from things like installing an energy efficient light bulb in your home. Those activities are solo, they're not what young people want to do. Instead, think about an environmental cleanup. In that way, you're turning volunteering into hanging out with your friends in a park for an afternoon, and you're hitting what young people care about most, which is hanging out with their friends and layering on social change as a bonus.
The second thing you can do to make volunteering easy for young people is to make it accessible. And by accessible, we mean young people want to volunteer not at home, but close to home. So the proximity to home actually is the second most important factor after volunteering with friends. So if you want to run a book drive, for example, do it at the mall or do it in their schools, right? Or you could do it online or you could do it via cell phone. So anywhere where it's easy for young people to take action, that's really easy. That's close to home is where they want to be at.
So young people consider themselves pressed for time. When I think of college students, I think of sleeping till noon, going to class for 3 hours, and then partying all night. And yet when they think of themselves as pressed for time. Whether they're in college or high school, they don't have enough time to volunteer. That's actually the #1 reason they give for not volunteering, is that they don't have enough time. So what we've seen is give them something that is brief or sort of all-encompassing. And give them an option. So you need to be able to say to them, this can take 5 minutes, and so maybe they only have 5 minutes. Maybe this takes an hour, maybe it takes half a day, but give them those different options. And also, if you can imagine the new ways we access the internet. It's when you think of accessing the internet sort of now and in the past, it's like you get on a computer, you sit for an hour, you surf the net, whatever it might be. These days, we're accessing the internet via mobile. And so everything's in short pulses. So you're checking your phone for 5 minutes. An hour later, you're checking it for 5 minutes again. 3 hours later, you're checking it for 5 minutes. And so that mindset is bleeding into volunteerism. They need things in sort of brief pulses. Maybe it's 5 minutes at a time, 5 times throughout the day, as opposed to something that's sort of a longer time commitment that they can't control. They like being able to control what they're doing. So if they want to do it at 10 at night, great. If they want to do it at 7 a.m., great. Give them that opportunity to do something that's brief and easy.
And when we think about volunteering activities, a lot of times we think that the cause is enough for young people to volunteer. It's enough to encourage them, it's enough to motivate them, but we never ask the question, like, why would they do it? What's important to them? So like the question that Bob asked earlier, it's like, ask them, or think about what's fun to them, what are their hobbies, what are their interests, and then figure out a way to create an opportunity, a volunteering, a service opportunity that relates to the activity that they spend a lot of time on anyways. So somebody who's in a sports team is more likely to work in a rec center, or to teach somebody how to play basketball or football. Somebody who is in the arts program is more likely to teach somebody how to draw or create a painting class. So one example is one of our Do Something Awards semifinalists. It was a small group of girls who loved dancing. They started an after-school program where they taught disabled youth to dance, and they call it Everybody Dance Now. And it's now a national program. There's like 14 different chapters around the country, but it's working because they have girls across the country who love dancing, and they see this as a way to contribute to society, and they can empower young people who are disabled through dancing, something that they already love.
So to go back to environmental organizations, I like to give them a tough time because that's one of my primary causes I care about, environmental issues. But making sure that even if you're working on environmental issues, to keep the benefit or the impact on the world focused on people. So again, thinking about energy efficient light bulbs, we found that young people, when we asked them how valuable certain activities are, that they found sending an online thank you message to our troops is more valuable than in the real world installing an energy efficient light bulb in their school or in their home. And so the difference isn't whether or not they're doing it with other people. Both of those are solo activities, but the difference is whether or not it's impacting a person. So if you keep the focus on humanizing the impact that you're having, you're going to convince more people that the work is important.
So spotlight free. And this is sort of counterintuitive because when you think of young people, you're like, no, do something. They want the spotlight on them at all times. But that's not actually necessarily true. Some young people are actually run from the spotlight or scared of the spotlight, or they don't want to raise their hand. Just think about any class you go into. If you ask a question and everyone knows the answer, it's actually really difficult for a teen to raise their hand, say they did something, to sort of put themselves out there in front of the group. So this stat to me means two things. One is one of the reasons we're focusing on groups is because they actually don't want to single out one person. They might be willing to sort of join something else, but they don't necessarily want to be president. I think sometimes when we think of young people, we're sort of talking about that, like those high achievers, those top 5% who are sort of president of every club in their school. But there's other young people who are sort of more reticent to take the spotlight. And I also think that they want to share the love with all of their friends. We had this intern, Supreet, who was talking about how in her club, we were like, hey, what if we give a prize to the club president? And she was like, are you kidding me? She's like, why would you give a prize to the club president? She's like, everyone here did something. Which is one of the reasons to do something while we're still using, scholarships and sort of amazing prizes to single out individual people. We're trying not necessarily to single out that president, but we're also trying to give people prizes that can be sort of spread around, that a pizza party that the entire club could enjoy, and something that doesn't necessarily put the spotlight on one person, because some people just want to volunteer as part of the group.
Aria just mentioned it, but it's thinking about opportunities that offer some sort of a benefit to young people. Yeah, they're altruistic. It's a cause that they care about. They're going to take action on it. But what's the benefit? Well, the top worry that we found that young people have is paying for college. The second worry that young people have is getting into college. So how can you help them address those two worries? So offer a scholarship opportunity. Instead of giving T-shirts and free sunglasses, stuff like that, maybe create a raffle of $5,000 scholarship, and everybody that comes to this event or participates in this activity will get a ticket into the raffle. And that will get more people to come and actually engage. So yeah, make it beneficial.
Okay. So for young people who volunteer, social change can be a bonus. And a quick example of this, let's say you have Jake, who his number one issue is environmental issues. Then he has a friend, Alicia, who really cares about teen pregnancy. If you give Jake a choice and you say you can either volunteer on environmental issue alone, or you can do volunteer work with Alicia on teen pregnancy. Our data show that Jake is more likely to do that volunteer work with Alicia on teen pregnancy. And so the real takeaway for us is that while social change matters, that the decision of a young person to volunteer or not often depends on their friends. And that if we think about volunteering as a microcosm for a teen's world in general, where the #1 priority is hanging out with friends, that's really going to allow us to shape our volunteer activities in a way that works for young people. And here's another closing slide of Ryan Gosling, who agrees with everything, doesn't officially, but unofficially endorses everything we've said.
So let's give a big round of applause, mostly for Bob. So as I said earlier, you guys are going to get the comprehensive report. It's going to be emailed out to you guys. Please, please, please stay and eat all the food that's in the kitchen. I also want to unofficially invite everyone in the room to 2 upcoming amazing events. One is November 17th. We're holding a boot camp, and there's an opportunity to volunteer with the very young people we're talking about. It's just 2 hours on a Saturday. You can come and listen to their pitches of their amazing projects. And then if volunteering isn't your thing, on December 13th, we're having a Christmas party, and it's going to be awesome. So stay tuned, both for an invite to our boot camp to come volunteer, and then for our Christmas party on December 13th to have some booze and have a good time. So thank you guys so much.